The hits just keep coming for Boeing. Federal regulators are now calling for a redesign of one of the company's most popular planes. Phil LeBeau's in Los Angeles. We go to him for all things that move. Anything related to anything that moves, Phil tells us what's going on. Hi, Phil.
Hey, David. We are in the headline risk area for Boeing right now. And anytime you see headlines saying the 737 needs to be redesigned, that's why you see a stock like Boeing sell off fairly sharply after the headline came out today. Here's what this is all about. The NTSB issued its final report involving an incident where there was an uncontrolled engine failure on a Southwest Airlines flight back in April of 2018. You may remember there was a passenger partially sucked out of a window who later died. When they came down and they landed safely, they then inspected the engine. And what they discovered, the NTSB over the investigation, is that these engines should be redesigned. The inlet of them should be redesigned. The goal, to prevent uncontrolled engine failures in the future. Boeing issued a statement after the NTSB report saying Boeing is committed to working closely with the FAA, engine manufacturers, and industry stakeholders to implement enhancements that address the NTSB's safety recommendations. By the way, this is a recommendation. The NTSB is not a regulatory agency. It's not like they've got teeth that they can put behind these recommendations, but ultimately the FAA will work with Boeing. About 7,000 737 NGs. That's the variety of 737s that were built prior to the MAX. That's how many of these are impacted by these recommendations. Also, by the way, they expect to have modifications put in place over time that will address these concerns. As you take a look at GE, which makes the engines as part of a joint venture with Safran out of France, as well as Southwest. There was also a recommendation in the report for Southwest. Not a whole lot of movement on those stocks, David, but the bottom line is this. These planes are not going to be brought down. They continue to fly. These will be recommendations that will likely be implemented over the course of, let's say, 6 months to a year and a half. Ultimately, these fixes will go in on these engines to minimize that inlet there.
You know, Phil, if it were not for the 737 MAX, would we even be paying attention to a story like this?
Well, because it was an incident in which a passenger died, yes, it would get some attention. Do I think there would be a sell-off if it was not the 737? Absolutely not. When this stock went down earlier today, I immediately started calling people in Washington, as well as at Boeing, as at GE. It was very clear that this was, you hate to say a standard NTSB report, but that's what it was. They looked at it and they said, these are the recommendations. These planes are going to continue flying. It's not like they're bringing these planes down. It's not that they're unsafe. But you hit on the point there, David. If it's not the 737, does it get as much attention? Probably not.
All right, Phil, thank you. Phil LeBeau joining us this evening. Of course, in LA, it's a little bit earlier. Let's talk Boeing. Let's trade Boeing. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I tell you, I'm actually long Boeing, and I think, as we pointed out, I won't repeat the news, that I think this is significant news for a company that's been in the crosshairs. But the most important thing for the company is what they announced a week ago, which is their timeline. And again, until whoever sings, it's not back online. But early 2020 is what the market is now expecting from this company. And if you think about that dynamic, it allows them to get back to a production schedule, which could have them at 80 planes by the end of the year, which I think, leaving aside all the other noise, is what the stock is following.
Yeah, I still think there's too much headline risk, though. I mean, 375 was a level back in March. Stock went from 440 to 375, pretty much in a straight line. That's where we've traded up to, seemingly have failed again. I think it goes lower. I mean, they'll start grounding Boeing planes if there's not enough Johnny Walker Black in the little, the little car parts that they bring down the aisle, because that's the type of microscope I think they're under right now. I think any agency that is any oversight.
Have you been underserved on an airplane?
I don't drink on planes, and you've flown with me before. I sit there and
sounds like you.
My point is, though, there's too much headline risk. There are too many agencies that can say something negative. I think you avoid the stock here. I think it goes lower.
Let me just push back a little. It seems like the stock trades, absorbs bad news better and better each time that we see bad news. I don't know that this would qualify as overly bad news, but it seems to have weathered a number of terrible hearings.
This is one of the worst years you could imagine for a corporation, period. And it's still up 14%.
Right. And the stock just seems to be somewhat impervious to really bad news.
It's the benefit of a duopoly.
Well, let's think about this. So,
Yeah.
like, as we get into the new year, there's probably two pieces of bad news that are going to happen. That A, this schedule gets pushed out when these Maxes get back up in the air, and B, maybe they lose their CEO. You know, those are two things that I would think that could be
Although
on the
that
radar
may not
in
be
Q1.
seen as a negative at this point.
Well, unless that they just promote somebody internally who's also been there for 25 years or something like that. I mean, I guess that it's, you know, like to David's point, yeah, the stock's up 14%. 346 people died in two crashes in the last 18 months on their planes. And, you know, there was a headline yesterday about the FAA chief thinking about taking a more holistic approach to approvals rather than just letting the airline makers, or the airplane makers do that. You know, I just think that, yes, the stock has been very resilient. Yes, I know a lot of people are thinking about the loss of earnings this year. You get back up to a production level of the MAX in 2020. You get all that back. You get the cash flow going again. And then it's a cheap stock in that regard. But I think that there's probably a couple headlines.
Really quickly, there's a capacity issue for airlines to think about here. I think people are not really estimating that the capacity growth that you've seen in airlines over the years that people are so concerned about for this sector, this has really helped them. And I think you may have a bad line coming out next year.